Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. We're going to do something a little different. Usually we do the Parsha during the slot, but we have Shavuos around the corner, and there is this magnificent, very short little book called the Book of Ruth, or Ruth, and it is a fascinating little book, which is something that we read pretty quickly on Shavuos morning, and we're done. And it's like a very, very short one. You know, we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it. It's a nice little cute story, but as we'll see, the story has incredible significance, and my hope is that we could dig down a little bit and see a different understanding of the book. We're going to split it up into two sections because there are 4 chapters. So today we're going to go through chapters 1 and 2, and then next week we're going to go through chapters 3 and 4. And my hope is that we walk away with a far more profound understanding of this book and what it's doing, why we're learning this, what it's all about. Okay. Yes.
Ruth, the first convert, and every person that converts since then gets the name Ruth. Is that true?
Some people choose the name Ruth for this reason. You don't have to. You could choose any name you want. But many people do this for this reason. The fact is that I'm not sure if she's the first, but she's probably the most famous of converts, and therefore many people choose her name. Okay, so let's learn more about her. Let's begin. So what we have in front of you is as follows, just to understand the handouts. You have the psukim, the verses, and that is in the regular print. And then in the bold words, okay, we're going to have to do a little bit of sharing today. I sincerely apologize. There's just more people. Maybe if yes, okay, that's not the handout. Just letting you. That's from a different class. Yeah, there may be some overlap. I know there may be some. Okay, good. Okay, okay. Well, and what you see in bold are other sources, or rabbinic sources. So whether it's Talmudic sources, midrashic sources, that's what you have with the bold words. So we're going to be seeing the psukim. We're going to go through the verses of the book of Ruth, and then we are also going to go ahead and see some extra sources which will help shed a lot of light onto the book. So let's begin, and we're going to read the verses rather quickly, if that's okay, and because I really want to spend time unpacking it. So Vayihi b'mei shvot hashoftim, and it was the time when the judges ruled. Okay, so this is in a pre-monarchy era in the Jewish world. It doesn't give us a very particular time frame, although we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's towards the end of the Judges period. Remember, the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, and you have Joshua, Yeshua, who leads the Jewish people, and he is ruling over the Jewish people, and then the era that follows Yeshua is the era of the Judges, okay? After the Judges, we move on to the monarchy. You have Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, and you have David HaMelech and the Davidic line, etc., etc. So this is during the period of the Judges, okay? Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz, and there was a famine in the land. Vayelech ish mi Beis Lachem, and a man, first unnamed, went from Beis Lechem, otherwise known as Bethlehem, okay, Beit Lechem, Yehuda, which is in Judea, in Yehuda, Lagur b'stei Moav, to go live in the fields of Moab, hu ve'ishto shnei banav, him, his wife, and his 2 sons. Okay, so we have an individual, we're told there's a famine, there is an individual who leaves from, ironically, what's the name of the city? It's called Beis Lechem, the house of bread, right? There's a certain irony over here. He goes from a place literally called the house of bread, and he goes to Moab. Okay, so we're going to have to think about what do we know about Moab, and who is this person? Before we do so, let's just zoom out for a moment and ask ourselves, who wrote this book? Okay, so the Gemara in Baba Basra tells us, source A, Shmuel Kasav Sifro, V'Shoftim V'Rus. Shmuel wrote his own book, meaning the book of Samuel. Okay, what takes place in the book of Samuel? What takes place in the book of Shmuel? That is, it talks about Shmuel's life, but ultimately it's really a book about establishing the monarchy. Okay, so you have, he anoints Shaul HaMelech, and ultimately that does not work out. And really, Shaul's lasting legacy is anointing David HaMelech, King David, as the king. And that is really what the book of Shmuel is all about. The book of Judges is the book that, is the book of the era before that. The book of Ruth is just a third book. Now, what we're going to suggest during this class is that it's not just that he wrote those 3 books, but in some ways those are a trilogy. Okay, they are a trilogy. That the book of Shoftim is a pretty dark book. Okay, it's like the Jewish people were getting butchered by everyone around them, and they're all serving idols, and then they do tshuva, they repent, God saves them, and it lasts for about 15 seconds, and they go back to like serving idols and getting killed by and attacked by their enemies. They do tshuva, they repent, and it happens again. And really the pinnacle in a very or I should say the depth of that book is you have a terrible story known as Pilegesh Begiva, where there is a civil war where they almost wipe out an entire tribe. It's not a good time for the Jewish people. That is the book of Shoftim. We know the Davidic line is seen as the high point of Jewish history. King David, David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, and that is that short era is the one that we it keeps that flame alive for what we hope for in the future. The book of Ruth, as I liked, not my own personal suggestion, but as some suggest, is really a bridge between those books. That in some way, what was going on in Shoftim and all of its chaos, and what's going to happen in the book of Shmuel, where he eventually establishes a unified people revolving around, ultimately, a Beis Hamikdash revolving around God, all of that really only comes about because of this small little book. Okay? A little more exciting. What goes on in this book now? We really have to find out. Okay, so let's see. Now let's learn about this person. V'shem ha'ish Elimelech. We're at verse 2. The name of this man is Elimelech. V'shem ishto Naami. The name of his wife is Naami. V'shem shnei vanav. And the name of his two sons are Machlon v'Kilyon. Ephrasim mi Beis Lechem Yehuda. They are Ephratim. Ephratim is a term that's used for people of stature from, again, Beit Lechem. Vayavos de Moav vayusham. They come to Moav and they are there. Now, why does he move away when there's a famine? Why does he move away? Says the Medrash, a rather famous Medrash in source B, Kishabo Shnei Ra'avon. When the years of famine came to Israel, Amar Elimelech said to himself, Achshav Kal Yisrael Misabvin Pischi. All the Jews are going to surround my house. Okay, in other words, Elimelech was a wealthy individual. He had the means to survive. Not only did he have the means to survive, he was very, comfortable. And he was concerned that everyone's going to see his comforts, and they're going to be knocking on his door all day, right? The Mashiach comes, you're in the middle of dinner, you give the person a few bucks, and they come back a few minutes later, and it says, Zebiku Pasu, each one with their little collection box, Amar Ubarach Lo Mipinehem. He goes ahead and he runs away from them. I don't want to give to the poor. Now, I don't want to give to the poor. For those with that biblical knowledge, right, in Tanakh, who else says, I don't want to give to the poor? Which nation or which city is known for not wanting to give to the poor? Sodom, the city of Sodom, right? We know that Sodom is ultimately destroyed because they don't want to go ahead and give to the poor. The Mechilta in source C says this very clearly. Amru Hastomiyim, the people of Sodom said, Ein anu tzrichim sheyavo adam etzlenu. We do not want people to come to us. Hel Allah hare mazon yotze me'etzlenu. Because if we do, then all the food we have will all be taken out. V'kesef v'zav avanim tovos and margolios and all the gold, silver, precious stones yotos me'etzlenu. We'll lose it all because we'll be giving to the poor. Bo v'nishkach toras regal meratzenu. Let us eradicate passerbys from our city. So people have. That's Sodom and Gomorrah, exactly. Yes. So just like people have, no solicitation, right? So in the front of Sodom was no solicitation. If you don't have a house in the city, we do not want you here. No one's allowed to come in. We will not give to anyone. And the most infamous, most terrible, tragic story, which really speaks to the depth of their depravity, is a Gemara in Sanhedrin in source D says like this: Havya hahi revisa. There was a young woman, dahavas kamafka rifta la'anya bechatzba, who gave bread to a poor man. This was a young woman who lives in Sodom, and some poor guy got lost. He shows up in Sodom. Nebuch, so sad. He's sitting there, he has no food, and this girl has a big heart, so she goes ahead and slips him some bread. Iglai Milsa. The matter became known. In other words, the police, the giving charity police, the people going around making sure no one's giving charity. They go ahead and they find out. Shafyua Duvsha. They covered her in honey. Vukumua Ali Igar Shura, and they placed her on the wall. They attached her to the wall of the city. Asa Zibore Vachlua, and the hornets came and consumed her. Terrible, terrible image. And the Gemara says this is like what tipped the scale, which ultimately caused God to say, okay, enough is enough. And that's when Sodom is destroyed. Now, God obviously wants to go ahead. God says, I'm going to destroy the city of Sodom. These people are so depraved. These people do not deserve to exist, certainly not in the land of Israel, and goes ahead and destroys them. Not just the people, but this mentality. A people who are able to have this type of mentality, they don't belong in civilization. This is not the way civilization is going to function. God destroys them. But there are survivors. There are survivors from the story. Who survives from Sodom? Lot, right? Avram's nephew, Lot, right? He is living in Sodom. He runs off with his wife and two daughters. His wife doesn't make it, and he's with his two daughters. And the Torah tells us that he ultimately he causes his daughters to conceive. They have two children. Okay, they have two children. Now, as we'll see, they didn't just happen to have lived in Sodom. The attributes of Sodom, again, not wanting to share with others, were unfortunately attributes that these women, that these people held on to. And how do we see? That's because their two children, their names were Ammon and Moab. Okay, Ammon and Moab. And we know generations later, the Jewish people encounter them as they're traveling in the desert. The Jews are traveling in the desert on their way from Egypt to Israel, to this land of Israel. And Ammon and Moab they encounter in some fashion, and because of what happens, or as we'll see, what doesn't happen, there is a decree that although the Jews are able to marry, anyone who converts is a regular, full-fledged member of the Jewish people, with two exceptions. People from the nation of Ammon and Moab. You cannot marry them. Why can't you marry them? Says the pasuk in Devarim. Look at source E. Lo yavo Ammoni uMoavi bekal Hashem. No one from Ammon or Moab should join. They can't enter the congregation of Hashem. They cannot convert. Gamdor asir le'yavalehem mikal Hashem ad olam. They can never, even a 10th generation, meaning even eternally. Why? Al devar ashelo kidmu eschem balechem uvamayim. Because they did not greet you with bread and water. B'derech b'tzeschem mitzrayim. When you left Egypt, you were passing by this nation. We're cousins with them, right? Lot is the nephew of Avram. It's family, it's mishpacha. They're traveling through the desert. The Jewish people just left Egypt. We have nothing. And we pass by this nation. And what do? Oh, look, the poor Jews are walking by. Boom, they lock their gates. We don't want to give them anything. And God says, that is not a trait that we want to have anything to do with. And therefore says we will not allow anyone from Ammon and Moab. And we'll see, when I say anyone, that's a little bit, it has to be qualified, because we'll see, Ruth, ultimately comes from the tribe of, comes from this nation of Moab. So as we'll see later on, there is a distinction maybe between the males and the females, okay? But one way or another, the reason behind it is that they held on to the characteristics of the people of Sodom. That just like Sodom says, we don't want to give to anyone, we don't want to share, we don't want to help those who are in need, says the people, their ultimate descendants, Ammon and Moab, who survived, they had the same attributes. Okay? So ironically, or not so ironically, not so coincidentally, this man, Elimelech, who's leaving Israel, why is he leaving Israel? Because I don't want to share. So where does he go? He goes to the people whose flag is, we don't want to share. In other words, it's not coincidental that he goes to Moab. They're not just happen to be a nation which lives nearby, and he's like, where's the closest place? I need to get out of here. And he runs off, I'm here at Moab. No, this was a deliberate choice. He is acting in a way which is, counter to what we believe in as a people. The notion of, we the attributes that we try to emulate are this notion of gomle chasadim, of giving of ourselves, of sharing. And the people of Moab are the ones who say, not at all. Elimelech, who has that attribute, the characteristic, says, where am I going to go? If I don't want to give to the poor, let me go to the people of Moab, because they have that same attribute. Okay? It gives a little bit of a shade of darkness to this story. Okay? Pasuk at the bottom of the page for verse 3 and 4. Vayamas Elimelech ish nami vatisher hi u'shnei baneha. Elimelech, Nami's husband, dies, and she was left, her and her two sons. Vayislam nashim, and these two sons get married, Moavios. They marry people from Moab, people who presumably did not convert. Shema achas Orpa v'shema shen is Rus. The name of one is Orpa, the name of the other is Rus. Vayesh v'sham ka'aser shanim, and they dwell there for 10 years. Okay, so A, they run away from the Jewish people. B, they assimilate. Okay, vayamusu gam shneim machlon v'kilyon, and Machlon and Kilyon die. Vatishaer ha'isha mishnei yoladeha u'meisha, and the woman is left of her two sons and her husband. In other words, she is completely left alone. She doesn't have a spouse. She doesn't have her sons. She has these two daughters-in-law. Of course, they're not related to her by blood. That's all she has left. Okay? Before we go further, let's take a little bit of a step back. And try to understand the people of Sodom. The typical way that we are taught about the people of Sodom, the people of Sodom, is that they're just jerks. They're bad people. They're people like, hey, can you do me a favor? No. You have an extra? No. Nothing. No. Right? That's what it sounds like. They just sound like bad people. People you want to have nothing to do with, but just absent-minded, self-centered narcissists. That's what it sounds like.
Jews?
Sodom? No. These were people, they lived during the times of...
Jews, either one of them. Sodom or Gomorrah.
They were cities that existed during the time of Abraham, of Avraham, right? So it's well before the Jewish people existed. Presumably, but the Torah doesn't take issue with that. Their issue is not with their pagan worship. The issue is clearly only specifically about their misbehavior, about the fact that they were not kind people. So let's try to dig down a little bit deeper and try to understand, is it just that they were terrible people? Like they were clearly terrible people. Is it just that they were just that narcissist, self-centered? Or is there something else that we're missing over here? So let's look at source F, okay? And this is a little bit about Lot. Okay, so let's try to understand Lot. The Torah tells us that Lot was a wealthy individual. Look at the pasuk in source F. The gam Lot holech as Avram, to Lot who went along with Avram, hayatzon uvakar v'ohalim. He had sheep, cattle, and tents. In other words, Lot, in addition to Avram, Lot became wealthy. Okay, Avram, as he's traveling along through, his encounter with Egypt, he becomes wealthy, and the Torah says, and also Lot became wealthy. How did Lot become healthy? Who is the source of his wealth? It's essentially Avram. In other words, if Lot had not been with Avram, he would have nothing. The reason that Lot has any wealth is because of the fact that he's associated with Avram. Okay? So ultimately, if you were to stop and say, Lot, where did you get this money? Where did you get this wealth? How did you get this, all these sheep, these cattle, etc., it's his association with Avram. And we know, the Torah tells us there's tension between Avram and Lot, which ultimately leads Lot to say, I need to get out of here. Why does he want to go away? One understanding, Rashi says, there's a halachic dispute about whatever, not going to get into the details. But some want to argue, and maybe we could relate to this on some level, and that is that there is something almost shameful. There is a feeling of smallness, a feeling stifled. If everything I have is because this person's giving it to me, you feel small. You feel small. The pasuk in Mishlei, Shlomo Melech, if you look, just jump to source H, okay? Source H, it says, Va'eved love li'ish malveh, that a borrower is considered a slave to the lender. What does it mean a borrower is considered a slave to the lender? It's a very strong term. So the Gemara in the Yerushalmi in source I says, someone who eats from his friend's bread is embarrassed to look at him. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that anyone who's a guest in your house, they don't want to have talk to you, but they're speaking about a very deep feeling that, again, I'm sure we've all maybe felt to some degree, and that is when people do us favors. Some people are like, I'll be the first to know, I don't like any favors. I don't like any favors. But where does it come from? It comes from an unhealthy pride. I don't need you. I could do it myself. No, that's a joke. We all need each other, right? But there is a sense, whenever you receive something, by definition, something has been taken away. If you had to help me off the floor, that means that I couldn't do it myself. So a part of me has just been, you gave to me, but at the same moment, you've taken away. If you go back to source G, Rashi actually says, the word chesed, kindness, lashon arami cherpa, is also an Aramaic term for shame, for embarrassment. What is the connection between kindness and shame? The connection is actually quite obvious. And that is that when a person does someone a favor, very often it is accompanied with a sense of shame, right? Some people are better at doing favors than others, where they don't make you feel bad about you receiving something. But even still, there's still something like, I don't want to receive. It comes from a healthy place. The second, I always think of like my children as they're it gets to that stage where they could finally pick up the spoon and kind of get it somewhere near their mouth, right? Even though it's much more efficient when mom or dad helps them with their yogurt. But a second they have the ability to do something, there's a sense of independence. I want to be independent. I want to have my sense of self. So even though when they're doing their yogurt by themselves, there's yogurt in their hair and the yogurt on the floor and the yogurt all over the place and the spoons flinging everywhere. But at the same time, they feel a sense of, and they're not going to use those words, they can't even speak, but there's a sense of independence. And when mom and dad is doing it, they feel small. And anytime someone's doing something for us, something is being taken away at the same time. So with that in mind, let's look at Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos, in source J, it says, Arba midos ba'adam. It talks about 4 different types of human traits. Ha'omer shali shali, a person, and it talks about different types of relationships that people have with their own material wealth and their own material, the things that they own and things that others own. So a person who says, what is mine is mine, v'shalcha shalchan, what is yours, zo mida beinonis. This is like middle of the round, mediocre trait, like middle of the ground, basically it's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. That sounds like normal, like live and let live. You have your things, I have my things, sounds okay. But then the Mishnah says, V'yesh omer, there are those who say, Zo midas Sodom, that this is actually the characteristic of Sodom. Okay, so what's going on over here? What does it mean? The people of Sodom are saying, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. That means there's something a little bit deeper over here, there's a philosophy over here. How many people here have read The Fountainhead? Okay. The Fountainhead. Nice Jewish woman who changed her name to Rand. It's not her name. But anyway, yeah. Anyway, so she was in Rand. So she, right? Okay, this is a very popular book, no? Okay, very popular book. Fountainhead, what other books did she wrote? Anthem, Fountainhead, and there was like the other one. Atlas Shrugged. Okay, there we go. Okay, they made like a terrible movie about it. Okay, there we go. So the bottom line is this was a very popular writer, extremely popular writer, and it was the height of the Cold War, right? I think she's actually Russian herself and very much anti-communism. Her book was almost like the opposite extreme of communism. Communism is we all need each other. We can't do anything without one another. And her whole philosophy, which was very, was considered like the very American philosophy was, the term that they used was rugged individualism. This notion of think of the people on the West Coast or middle whatever, going ahead and breaking new ground in America, coming on their own, pulling up their own bootstraps and doing it all on our own. We don't need other people. We could do this all on our own, right? Rugged individualism says I am self-made. I don't need anyone else, right? All these people coming, we could build this country. We don't need help from anyone else. We are self-sufficient. We are the individual. We have the sense of pride, right? right? And in her book, one of her books, she in a conversation, there is this term, she defines the term freedom. Freedom, to ask nothing, to expect nothing, to depend on nothing. Okay? Basically, it's to be completely independent. That is seen as a value, seen as the highest value in her worldview, this was the highest value. Let's think about that. That sounds awfully like, or possibility, of what Sodom is all about. In other words, until now we looked at Sodom as a bunch of narcissists, but maybe not. Maybe they had a philosophy which said, actually, I don't want to give to you, not because I don't like you, on the contrary. I like you so much. And if I give to you, I am diminishing you. And what I believe is that every human being should be free. And freedom means to depend on nothing, to depend on no one. And therefore, the people of Sodom were not narcissists, okay? They had a dangerous philosophy. I want to be very clear before we go further. This is not a philosophy we endorse in any way. It's a broken philosophy. We'll talk about more why that's the case. It's diametrically opposed, not diametrically, I shouldn't say diametrically. It is not a Jewish philosophy, but the philosophy is the value is each person should be completely independent. And when I give to the poor, I've just taken away from the poor. Don't take from the poor. And as much as everyone would agree over here, if I were to walk by someone on the street who is asking for money and I take the $5 out of their hats and take it for myself and say, that's terrible. They would say giving $5 is also terrible. Maybe you didn't take their money, but you took their dignity. And that's also a form of stealing. That's also something which is unethical. And that perhaps is the philosophy of Sodom. What is mine is mine, what is yours, is this notion of rugged individualism. Okay? We see them a little bit differently. We're going to come back to that. And I want to be clear. This is not something we endorse. We'll see. We're not on the opposite, but we'll see where exactly Judaism is plotted in this thinking. But it's a very, I'll just mention very parenthetically, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Gush Etzion, a very prestigious yeshiva in Israel. And he once was quoted as saying to students, he says, you're going to go back to America. I'm not concerned about all the movies you're going to watch and all the silly stuff you're going to watch. I'm concerned you're going to read The Fountainhead. That was my concern. I'm sure you're going to read these bad philosophies that are going to corrupt you. Okay, so I want to be clear. This is not a good philosophy, but we can understand where they're coming from. With that in mind, let's keep on reading. Okay. So she arose, her and her daughter-in-law. And she returned from the fields of Moab. She heard that there's food back in Israel. Famine's over. Okay, we fast forward to 10 years. She hears that there is food. Verse 7. She goes out of the place where she was. Her two daughters-in-law are with her. And they go on the road to return to the land of Yehuda. And she now turns to her two daughters-in-law and says, go back to your mother's home. God should do kindness to you as you did to the deceased and to me. In other words, the mere fact that you've come along with me, even to this degree, is already such a kindness to me, a kindness to your departed husbands. You've done enough. It's time to go home. Thank you so much. Okay? And Yitin, she continues with this blessing. Yitin Hashem lachem umatzena menucha isha beis isha. You should all find rest. You should find comfort with a husband. Vatishak lehen. She kissed them. Vatisena kolan vativkena. And they lifted up their voices and they wept together. Vatomarna la. But they said to her, Ki tach nashuv la'amech. We want to go back to your people. Okay, verse 11, excuse me. Vatomer Nami says, Shovna v'nosai lama salach imi. Why are you going with me? Ha'oli vanim b'mea v'ho lechem anashim. Do I have other children in my womb that they're going to be your husbands? And as she starts painting out this almost ridiculous picture, you'll see she's not it's a short book, and there's a very long dialogue. So what seems to be is basically she's almost taunting them. That's what you get from this psukim over here. That basically she's saying what do I have sons right now that they're waiting for? Shovna v'nasai, return my daughters. Lachain lechna, go. He's a kanti mios leish. I'm too old to be with a man. He amarti yesh l'tikva gam yisi alayla ish v'gam lativen. And she continues do you want me to be intimate with someone right now and have a child? What are you doing? I'm not pregnant. I'm not going. And even if I do become pregnant, she continues. Halahin to sabarna. Are you going to wait for them? Are you going to wait for them and refrain from having a husband for all this time? Albanosai, know my daughters, ki marli ma'od. Listen to this next word. We're at verse 13. I am very bitter, mikem, from you. I'm very bitter from you. What's she saying to them? She's saying that, why? Whenever you see, let me just pause for a second. Whenever you see a dialogue in the Torah where it's going on and on and on, you should assume that there's probably some back and forth. It's not like a piece in Shakespeare, it's this long soliloquy. She says one thing and they say something, no, whatever. And then she says something and they push back. And finally, at this point, they're not listening. So what does she do? She stops taunting them in this abstract fashion, with these silliness, and she says, no, go away. God has acted bitterly to me. God took away my husband and my 2 sons. You know why? Mikem, because of you. Because of the fact that they intermarried, right? So right now, she just basically did like a real, intense, attack on them. Ki yatsa v'yad Hashem, because the hand of God went out against me. Again, mikem, because of you. Okay? Vatisena kolana v'tivkena od. They lifted up their voices and they cried. Vatishak arba lechamosa v'rus davkaba. Arpa kissed her mother-in-law, but Rus held onto her. Vatomer, and then Nami continues. Hine shavi vimtech, your sister-in-law returned elamat, her nation to her gods. Shuvi achri vimtech, go back with her. Vatomer Rus, and Rus says, Al tifka ibi, don't tifka pagua. Pigua is like an attack, like stop attacking me. She says, listen, enough. I got it. You tried to push me away. It's too much. Stop. Okay, to go back. Here she says the most beautiful poetic words. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you sleep, I will sleep. Amech ami, your nation is my nation. Velokayach Elokai, and your God is my God. Bashir tamusi amus, where you die, I will die. V'shama kaver, and there I will be buried. Ko yasa Hashem li, this is what God should do to me. V'cho Yosef, and that's what God should continue to do. Ki amaves yafrid beini uveinech, because God, till death do we part. These are the most poetic lines in this book, and this is her basically saying, I want to be connected to you. Now, interestingly, our sages interpret these words to be actually have like a bit of a halachic discussion. If you look at the Gemara in Yevamos, it says like this. It says, Amra Allah. They interpret these verses in a very non-poetic, in a very legalistic fashion. It's almost like, rabbis, what's wrong with you? You took the most poetic passage, one of the most poetic passages in the Talmud, in the Torah, and made it like this legalese discussion. Very strange. Let's read it. Amra Allah, she said, now they're interpreting, Asr lan tchum Shabbos, it's forbidden for you to walk beyond the city limits. There is a prohibition called tchum Shabbos, where you can't go past city limits. We don't have to deal with that in a big city like this. Sorry? The Talmud is interpreting what Nami is telling Rus. Okay, so Nami said to Rus, "It is forbidden to go beyond the Tchum Shabbos." So what does Rus reply? "Basher telchi elech, where you go, I will go." Right? So they taken that very poetic statement and made it like, "I'm going to keep Shabbos." That's what it's about. And then Asr lan yichon. Then she says, "Oh, it's forbidden for you to be as a single person, with a single woman, together with a man, right? Or with a married woman, whatever. You can't be in seclusion with a man." And then what does she respond to that? Basher talini alin. Where you sleep, I will sleep. You see what's going on over here? They're taking this poetry and they're making it like there's this halachic discussion. She says, there's 613 mitzvos. Amech ami, your nation is my nation. Asur lan avodas kochavim. She says, yeah, but idol worship. And to that she says, your God is my God. Right? So what did the sages just do over here? It's very strange. But what they did is very beautiful. It's a longer discussion. But when we go through we have a conversion process. Okay, it's become formalized over the years. Historically, there weren't too many people who ever drink. There's one every 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, because got to be insane. You still have to be pretty crazy, really crazy. But then you have to be insane to convert to Judaism. It was you're middle of the Holocaust. I want to be it just doesn't add up. You're middle of the Crusades. Give me a break. This is not happening. But nowadays, there's far more. It's a little more formalized, and there's systems, and people have tests, and all that. But at the core, what is conversion? Conversion isn't a person passing an exam. Conversion is saying, I want to be part of this nation. Now, if I'm part of this nation, as a byproduct of being part of this nation, there are mitzvos, there are commandments that are incumbent upon every person to do, right? So what our sages are actually doing over here, I think, is very incredibly clever. They're saying, what Rus is saying is that I want to be like you. She says, Nami, I adore you. You're this incredible person. I want to be with you. Davak means to cleave, right? I want to be with you, right? I see you. I see something special in you, right? I want to be with you. And if a person wants to be part of the Jewish people, almost by definition, that's going to include doing all these mitzvos. Our sages, by reinterpreting this verse as if to say that, yes, there's the technical element that is needed. A person can't say, I want to be part of the Jewish people, and not have a clue what it means to be part of the Jewish people. But at the core, it's about peoplehood. At the core, it's about peoplehood. It's not about the mitzvos. Again, I want to be clear. You can't go through a conversion without being committed to the mitzvos. But at the core, it's about peoplehood. The mitzvos are a byproduct of that. In an extreme example, the Gemara talks about a case where a person converts to Judaism and doesn't realize that idolatry is forbidden. It's a good conversion. And you're like, what are you talking about? How do you convert and serve idols at the same time? That doesn't make any sense. But the answer is no, because conversion is about peoplehood. And the Gemara says, okay, that person, when they find out that idolatry is forbidden, they have to go and bring offerings in the Beis HaMikdash later as an atonement. In other words, but it worked. How does it work? Because again, it's about peoplehood. Okay, but it's taking us a little bit beyond. Okay, let's look at verse 18. She saw Nami saw that Rus was strong-minded about it, so she left alone. And they keep on walking until they come to Bethlehem. And when they come to Bethlehem, they see Nami. Again, she was an aristocrat. There was the most wealthy family, and now she comes back broken. She is, as we'll see, impoverished. She comes back broken all by herself, and they say, "This is Nami." And she says to them, "Al tikrena li Nami. Don't call me Nami. Karana li Mara. Call me bitter. The name Nami means pleasant. And she's a play on words over here. It says, stop calling me pleasant. I am bitter. I'm bitter. Ani malea halachti, v'reka hashivani Hashem. I left full. I came back empty. Lama sikrena li Nami. Why are you calling me Nami? Vashem anavi. Hashem has, so to speak, testified against me. V'shaka herali. And God has afflicted me. Okay, so what's very interesting about this little back and forth is that they say about her, is this Nami? And she says, don't call me Nami, call me Mara. And they say, what do they say back to her? It's a trick question. Nothing. No one ever spoke to her. Do you see what's going on over here? As she comes back to the city, they're talking about her. Everyone's pointing, and she hears them. She hears don't call me Nami. And she's trying to engage them in dialogue, and just completely disregard her, right? They're speaking about her. Is this Nami? And she says, don't call me Nami, etc. She gives this whole speech. I'm so bitter. And what do you do when someone says you're so bitter? You hug them. You talk to them. Nothing. There's no response. Okay, it's giving you a little bit of an insight in terms of what the community is like in this moment. It's a bit of a dark moment in Jewish history. It's the time of the Shoftim, the time of the judges. There's a lot of disunity, and we'll see more of that as we continue. Okay. V'tashav Nami v'Rusa Moavia kalasa ima hashava mistei Moav, and Rus, the Moavites who returned with her from Moab, come back. They come back in the beginning of the barley harvest. Okay, before we begin the next chapter, I want to bring this story back all the way back to the beginning of creation, or the biblical narrative of creation, because that is going to play a significant role in this story as well. There is a very famous medrash which a lot of little kids know. And the idea, the midrashic literature is written in a fashion that it's fun and engaging as a child, but the goal is as we get older to ask ourselves, what did that mean? What's it trying to tell us? Because yes, it's cloaked in these cute stories, but the goal is for it to teach us deeper ideas. And if we're still learning it like we did when we were 6, then we're in trouble. Okay? So the Gemara tells us as follows. Look at source N. Okay? The Gemara says, Amra Yareach Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The moon said to God. Okay, immediately you ask yourself, does the moon speak? No, the moon doesn't speak. But this is what the narrative, okay? The moon speaks to God. Ribono Shalom, Master of the world. Afshar l'shnei malachim, shishtamshu b'keser echad. How could you have 2 kings, the sun and the moon? How could they share? How could you have 2 kings? You can't have 2 CEOs, right? There's articles about companies which have 2 CEOs. It's usually a disaster, right? You can't have 2 kings. You can't have 2 rulers. It doesn't work. Amr la, God says, L'chi uma'ati atzmech. Go and diminish yourself. Go make yourself smaller. So the kid, my 5-year-old will say, why is the moon smaller? Because the moon complained to God, and God said, I shrunk the moon. That's why the moon is smaller than the sun. And obviously you're actually, there's kind of other reasons for that. So obviously it's teaching, it's trying to get a point across. We'll come back to that. Amr Lefanav, she says, the moon says, Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, Hova Mart Lefanacha Davar Hagun, because I said something proper to you, Amit es Atzmi, you want to make me smaller? End of dialogue. God doesn't respond in this midrashic teaching. And God actually, it sounds like the moon is right. The moon was right that there was something wrong that happened over here, that the moon is smaller. Okay, so let's take a step. What does it mean? The sun, the moon, bigger, smaller? So in all of the literature, when you think about the sun and the moon, you think about their relationship. What is the relationship between the sun and the moon? The sun gives light. The moon receives the light. It reflects light, but it doesn't have its own light. Okay, so the moon, and let's think back what we're talking about over here. The moon is a recipient. Right? And what is the moon? What is that? What does it feel like to be a recipient in the world as we know it? You feel small. You feel diminished. You feel constricted. And what the moon is telling God, so to speak, is that, this isn't right. This isn't, this is right. This is not going to work. And God says, no, you're small. You're right. There's going to be a sense of smallness. And at the same time, the Medrash concludes, the Gemara concludes by saying that the moon is right. There's actually, if you look, we're going to have Rosh Chodesh in a few days. And on Rosh Chodesh, we bring a Karban Chatas. There's a sacrifice, an atonement offering. And the Pasuk says, why is the atonement offering being brought? It's being brought on behalf of God. Whoa! God made a mistake? And the answer is yes. Not that he made a mistake, but there's something a little bit broken in the world. There's something in the regular way the world is created that the recipient, although they shouldn't feel small, does feel small. Right? In an ideal world, if we were to go ahead and recreate the world, we'd say, why should the one receiving feel small? They should feel good about themselves. So there's something almost which is like embedded into nature where the one who receives is the one who feels smaller, like the moon. And God in this medrash is acknowledging that it's imperfect. It's a necessary imperfect, but it's imperfect. There's something broken about that, which we're going to have to try to redeem, try to fix. But there's something, whenever you have like the moon and the sun, or you have other midrashim about the creation where like the tree bark rebels. There's a famous midrash that says the tree bark was supposed to taste like the fruit, but then the trees rebelled against God. How do trees rebel against God? What does that even mean? So obviously, again, it's coming to teach you something. It's saying that there's something embedded in nature. What this Gemara is telling us, embedded in nature, is this reality that those who receive feel small, and it's quote unquote unfair. Okay? Some suggest this even at the core of Adam's sin. Adam goes ahead, God tells him, here's your fruits, don't eat from this tree, etc., etc. And the Medrash, if you look at the Pasuk says, when Adam is confronted, Adam says that it's the woman. It doesn't say it's Chava, it's the woman. He says, the woman that you gave to me, she fed me. What does he mean, the woman that you gave to me? So different interpretations, but some suggest that this was actually what's at play. Adam felt stifled. Stop giving me stuff. I need to push back, right? What happens when, I have teenagers, right? So what happens? You push and push and push and push. What do they do? Eventually they just push back. Adults do it too, but we do it in a more like, pleasant, polite fashion. But no one likes being pushed down. We push back eventually, right? And that's what happens over here. The Adam pushes back and says, I need to rebel. I can't deal with this because you're giving me too many things. I don't want to be given things. It doesn't feel good to receive. Okay? With that in mind, let's try to get through this next chapter. We're running low on time. How are we going to do this? I'm going to summarize. We're not going to read it inside. Okay. New plan. I'm sorry. You can read it inside on your own. But we'll read some of the sources inside. But what happens next is as follows. Nami has a relative, okay? His name is Boaz. Okay? And Rus one day turns to Nami and says, Nami, my former mother-in-law, we're destitute. We have no food. Okay? There is a mitzvah. We read about it last week's parsha, where when people are harvesting, you have to leave certain things behind. Okay? If they drop something when they're harvesting, the halacha is you leave it on the ground for the poor to get. In addition, they have to leave the corners of their fields for the poor to be able to pick up. And all these different institutions which were created to ensure that no one would go hungry. Okay? So Ruth says, Nami, we don't have anything over here. Cupboards are empty. I'm going to go out into the fields and I'm going to try to find a place where I could, get some food. Okay, so she does so. But before we get back to her, look at source at Pasuk 4. Very strange. V'nei Boaz bami beis lechem. Boaz comes from beis lechem. Boaz again is this relative of Nami. Ve'yomer lekotrim, and he says to the harvesters, Hashem imachem. God is with you. That's a term you hear now. Sephardim say this more than Ashkenazim, especially in Israel. Say, Hashem imachem, God is with you. It's like almost like Shalom Aleichem. Shalom is the name of God. Peace be upon you, but also God is with you, right? Vayomer lo yivarech Hashem, and they said, may God be with you. Okay, so before we go further, let's learn a little bit about Boaz. Boaz is the hero, or one of the heroes of this book. But the truth is, he has a bit of a dark history. His dark history. The Gemara tells us that he had many wives and many children, okay? He had 30 sons and 30 daughters, okay? And he had parties that he made for all of his 30 sons and 30 daughters, okay? And the Gemara tells us that every single one of his sons and daughters and wives all died. The last one actually died just as Nami was coming home. Wow, what a tragedy. Now the Gemara tells us further, what was the reason? What did he do wrong that caused his children to die? And it says something fascinating. It says he made this party and invited so many people, but there was one person he didn't invite, and his name was Manoach. Who's Manoach? The father of Samson. Y'all with me? I know we're all over the place over here, but it's coming together, trust me. He doesn't invite Manoach. Why doesn't he invite Manoach? Now, let's assume Manoach, he doesn't invite him before he has his son Samson, before he has Shimshon. Why would Boaz not want to invite Manoach? Based on everything we've been discussing, what would be the reason, right? When I go to your house, what happens next? Right? If you invite me over for a meal, what do I do next? The polite things do, I invite you back, I reciprocate. Chesed, right? The way that we redeem some of the shame of kindness is to reciprocate, right? So if you give me a favor, oh, don't worry, next time thank you for helping me out. Next time you're stuck, you need a ride, I'll be happy to do so, right? So there's this reciprocation. So Boaz says, I'm not going to invite Manoach. You know why? Because I have 60 children. He has none. So he and his wife, they're never going to be able to reciprocate. So to save his dignity, I'm not going to invite him. Obviously a terrible mistake, but it's very Sodom-like, right? This notion of I want to maintain that person's dignity, and therefore I'm not going to give him. They're stuck. Where everyone over here in the story so far has been grappling with this notion that you want to give, but if by giving I take away, and therefore they're saying I'm not going to give. Obviously, there has to be a resolution, but they haven't figured it out yet. And in this moment, Boaz actually goes ahead and introduces something which is a radical institution, which to me and you, it doesn't seem so radical. Saying Shalom Aleichem, which is what people say to one another, which literally means God should be, it doesn't mean peace, it means God should be with you, is actually a radical idea which was instituted by Boaz here in this pasuk. Why? Because typically we're very conscientious as Jews about saying God's name for no reason. Right? I always tell my kids, say OMG. Don't say oh my God. Right? Oh my God is something we don't do. We're very conscientious. We don't say God's name in vain. To even say God should be with you, that's flirting with this idea of misusing God's name. We don't do so. But Boaz, in this moment, he hits rock bottom. He loses his spouses. He loses his children. And he realizes there's something broken in our society. So the Gemara in Brachos, you can read it inside yourself. He says, ultimately, what Boaz says is that Boaz says that I'm going to go ahead and institute something new. I'm going to institute something new where I'm going to say, God should be with you. When I say, instead of saying hello, I say, hi, God should be with you. And you say back to me, God is with you. What's Boaz trying to get at? Like, what is the value of saying God is with you? What does that do? How does that change? What's the difference between good morning or God is with you? What's the difference? What's the message when I say God is with you? I mean, at the very least, what it's saying is like, I recognize the divine image that exists within this person, right? God is not with this table, right? I wouldn't say God is with you to the table. I want to speak to the table. But I wouldn't say God is with this table. But I say God is with you. That means like, you're special. You're important. In other words, Boaz over here is starting to recognize that there's a problem in this society, right? Again, it's the same society which no one even talked to Nami. No one even acknowledged her, right? It's a society which is very self-centered. He himself was to blame in some respects, right? He's a leader of the Jewish people, and here he says we have to do something radical. We have to do something different. The Gemara goes so far as to say that it quotes a verse in Tehillim which says, "Heferu Torasecha, they voided your Torah." In other words, what he did was in some ways against the Torah. The Torah says, "Be very conscientious about saying God's name." He said, "No, but we need to mention God's name here because we need to invest dignity. We need to respect. And the only way we're going to do so is remind people of the divine image that exists within each and every person. Hashem imachem. That's what's happening over here. So there's a little bit of a turning point that's taking place. Okay? Let me summarize the next book. And bottom line is, he sees Nami. He sees Nami in the fields. He finds out who she is. He encounters her. He says, "I've heard all about you. I want you to take, stay here, and you don't have to go to any other fields. If you get thirsty, you could go to the canteens that are waiting over there." And basically, he tells her all this, and that's great. Okay. Bottom line is, she gets all these things. She spends all this time with at the field, and ultimately she comes back home after a whole day. And in addition, what Ruth does not know is that Boaz then turns to his servants and says to them, the harvesters, and says, "Guys, leave extra stuff for her. When you see Rus next to you, just drop some extra stuff." In other words, make sure she gets a lot, right? By the way, what's he doing? He's trying to help her in a bit of a more dignified fashion. We start seeing something happening over here, and he leaves all these things for her, and bottom line is she walks away with like a windfall of barley. Great, a very successful day of barley collection. Look at Pasuk, Okay, look at Pasuk. Pasuk 19, verse 19 on the last page. Okay, and her mother-in-law said to her. Okay, you see that 19? I'm going to read it in Hebrew. Vatomer la on the final page, verse 19, the middle of the page. Vatomer la chamosa. When she comes home, their mother-in-law Nami says to her, "Eifa lakata yom. Where did you harvest today? Vana asis. Where did you work? Yimakirech baruch. The one who recognized you, the one who is kind to you, should be blessed." Vatagel, the key words over here. Vatagel lechamosa. She told her mother-in-law. And I know it's translated differently in the English. I'm going to translate it literally. Eis asher asasa imo, the individual to whom she did for. In other words, it says that she did something for him. The one I did something for, asa imo, not the one who did for me, but the one I did for, right? Who's that? It's Boaz. His name is Boaz. It's very strange. He did something to her, right? Says the Medrash. We look at source C, all the way on the bottom of the page. Tani b'shem Rav Yeshua, Yoser mimasha balabayis osem ani, more than the wealthy person does with the poor who receives, ha'ani osem bal habayis. The poor actually does much more for the one who gives. Shekain amra Rus said lenami, Shema ish asher asisi imo hayom. She said, the individual to whom I did today, v'lo amra asher asemi, not the one who did something to me. Right? There is this idea, when we think about it, right? I'll just use this example, use what was going on in this room as an example. I'm teaching a class, right? If no one would be here, I don't know, it'd be pretty awkward. And I wouldn't talk to myself, and that would be lousy, right? So who's doing more for whom in this room? I don't know. I think you're all doing something for me. But the fact that most of you are awake, and the fact that most of you are like somewhat nodding along, it tells me, okay, like some of this is like, making an impact, is resonating to some degree, right? So who's doing more, right? Rus over here says, he didn't do something for me. I did something for him. I gave him the opportunity to give. Whoa, right? This is a very independent, rugged individual. It's not a coincidence that she comes from Moab. She comes from a place where they have that sense of independence, and she's using that now, not in the perverse way that was used until now to say, I'm not going to give to anyone. But she says, even the act of giving, even the act of receiving, there is an act of giving. They're both true. When I receive, I'm actually giving to you. And therefore my dignity does not have to be robbed in this moment. I could appreciate that there is a mutuality, right? When someone gives to us, we always, I don't want to take. You're doing sometimes like you're doing someone a favor. Some people want to give you a gift, and no. It's not nice. Like you're actually helping the person. Again, obviously everything in moderation, but the point is that Rus over here introduces us to this concept that no, when you take sometimes, not always, you can't say, well, now I'm going to take everything because I'm helping everyone else, so give me everything I have. No, we're not saying that, but the point is that sometimes the act of giving, and there's a particular type of giving, which we're going to get back to, we're not there yet. In a particular act of, in sometimes the act of giving, in the act of receiving, there's act of giving as well. And that's the idea that that Rus introduces into our dialogue and perhaps even into our people. And what Nami then tells her says, keep going back to his field, stay put, I have a thought. And that's the end.
Give and receive.
Correct. So
She
Better to
turns
give
the whole
than
idea
to
of being
receive.
belittled and having less dignity, she turns it on its head.
sorry?
She goes one step farther and turns the idea of being belittled when you
Correct.
receive. It's the exact opposite.
It's literally the exact opposite. Exactly.
She's sitting there saying that whole principle you've been
Correct.
talking about is not really
Correct. But
mutuality.
it's correct, but keep in mind, it's also coming from a place of that strength, that rug. You have to be able to have some self-respect to be able to say so, right? In other words, it's not coincidental that she's coming from Moab, where they had that sense of self, and therefore they said, well, I want to give you your sense of self. Here she says, she's taking, again, that same principle of sense of self and saying, when I receive, I'm actually giving. Now, yes, of course, you want to be on the giving end, not the receiving end, but let's be honest, we're all on the receiving end all the time, right? We can't escape it. Anyone who ever claims to be a self-made person is not a person. Hey, what does it mean to be self-made? Do you not have parents? I don't care if they dropped you off at birth. There's no such thing as a self-made. We're all interdependent, right? So better to give than to receive. Yeah, but what Rus is introducing to our, the way of thinking is this notion that yes, that she's flipping the whole thing that we've seen until now on its head, and we still have a little bit more to develop. God willing, we'll pick up next week. Have a great day.